Hey everyone, my name is Brady Whitten and this is The Word Meets the World for February 2nd, 2022. So in 2020, at the start of the COVID-19 pandemic, many churches began to offer worship services online as a way of helping people stay connected to their faith communities and to the practice of worship. But a recent New York Times opinion piece entitled "Why Churches Should Drop Their Online Services" suggests it's time to stop the practice. Online church, the article says, while it was necessary for a season, diminishes worship and us as people. Others believe that online worship is an important tool that helps the church to be present to a culture that is increasingly scattered, busy, and distracted, and that it's an opportunity to bless people where they are. But what does the Bible have to say about all this? What does the Bible say about online worship? That's our topic for this week's The Word Meets the World. So what does the Bible say about online worship? Since the internet didn't exist when the Bible was written, it doesn't say anything directly about online worship. But the Bible does record a part of Jewish history that can perhaps give us some insight into this topic. So in 587 BCE, in what is known as the Babylonian Exile, the people of Judea were conquered by the Babylonians and forcibly uprooted from their homeland and made to settle in the land of the Babylonians. Before the exile, most Jewish people wouldn't have imagined worshiping God away from the temple in Jerusalem. In fact, Jewish law stipulated that certain aspects of Jewish religious life, especially animal sacrifice, could only be performed at the temple in Jerusalem. But during the exile, that was impossible. Not only had the Jews been expelled from Judea, the Babylonians had completely destroyed the temple. Psalm 137 expresses the pain of this time, and it says this: "By the rivers of Babylon, there we sat down and there we wept when we remembered Zion. How could we sing the Lord's song in a foreign land? If I forget you, O Jerusalem, let my right hand wither. Let my tongue cling to the roof of my mouth if I do not remember you, if I do not set Jerusalem above my highest joy." So with no access to the temple, something had to change in order for the Jews to retain their cultural and religious identity. And what emerged was synagogue worship. Now, synagogues were, and still are, consecrated spaces used for assembly, for prayer, for scripture reading, and for study. And they were established wherever a community of Jewish people happened to live. In synagogue worship, the focus shifted away from animal sacrifice to the reading, teaching, and study of the Jewish Bible. And the observance of the Sabbath also grew in significance during this time. And that's not all that changed. Although they still retained the idea that Jerusalem and the temple were special to God, the idea that God was a universal God, the God of all people and all places, began to grow in this time. In their time of exile, the Jewish people were reminded that God is not bound by place or time, but that God is with them wherever they were. The prophet Jeremiah, writing to the people of Babylon, wrote these words: "If you seek me, you will find me, if you search with all your heart." In the words of Rabbi Imar Shorsh, what came to fill the wrenching void of the temple's loss was a synagogue, a surrogate that affected the very survival of Judaism. In a chaotic world, holiness became portable, he says. And even when the Jewish people were permitted to return to Jerusalem and to rebuild the temple, synagogue worship and rabbinical teaching continued to operate alongside the newly constructed temple. We even see Jesus engaged in these once new practices in the New Testament. In the Gospel of Luke, in the 4th chapter, Jesus returns to his hometown in Nazareth, and it says this: "When he came to Nazareth, where he had been brought up, he went to the synagogue on the Sabbath day, as was his custom. He stood up to read, and the scroll of the prophet Isaiah was given to him." And when the Romans destroyed the temple in Jerusalem once and for all in 70 CE, these practices, again, sustained the Jewish people, and they still do to this day. So could it be that online worship is similar to synagogue worship? Like synagogue worship, online worship was a response to a crisis. One, the Babylonian Exile, the other, the COVID-19 pandemic. Like synagogue worship, online worship emerged for people who were displaced from their normal worship practices and who needed new ones to sustain them. If or when things return to normal, like synagogue worship, online worship has become a part of who we are. So in her New York Times piece, Tish Harrison Warren says, "People need embodied community. We believe God became flesh, lived in a human body, and remains mysteriously in a human body. Our worship is centered not on simply thinking about certain ideas, but on eating and drinking bread and wine during communion. Offering church online implicitly makes embodiment elective. It presents in-person gatherings as something we can opt in or out of with little consequence." Now, there is some truth in her concerns, and I think we should weigh them seriously. But perhaps the medium is not the biggest concern, but the heart of the worshiper is. Can online worship be a disembodied and spectator experience? Sure it can, but I would argue so can on-site worship. In his conversation with the Samaritan woman at Jacob's well, Jesus says this, "The hour is coming and is now here when true worshipers will worship the Father in spirit and truth, for the Father seeks such as these to worship him." I would argue that a person can worship God in spirit and in truth, both online and on-site. And experience confirms this. Whether it fits our theology and preferences or not, God's presence and power are clearly at work in online worship. Recently, I've heard multiple stories about how God has used online worship to be present to people and to change their lives. There's the woman who first connected with our church online who recently wrote to me and said, "This past June, after years of struggling and praying and trying and failing, I finally stopped drinking. She gives thanks to God and she said, 'Thank you for always being there with me.' And that was only made possible because of online worship." Then there's the man with cerebral palsy who worships, attends Bible studies, and serves as a worship host all online, who reports, "If it wasn't for online worship, I wouldn't be sure about my relationship with God." So listen, I love when God's people gather elbow to elbow, and I'm a firm believer in the incarnation and the importance of embodied church. And if you're able to attend on-site worship, I hope you make it your practice to do so. But I also believe online worship is an important tool that God is using to do a new thing, and that in a chaotic world, once again, holiness has become portable. Like synagogue worship, I believe that online worship is here to stay. And I, for one, am glad for another opportunity to share the good news with people, and am glad that there is another way that people can experience God's transforming presence in their lives. So what do you think about all this? So I want to leave you with some questions, maybe to guide your own thinking, or if you're watching this as part of a group, to guide your discussion. Before I put those questions up, I want to ask you, please like and share this video, and will you like, subscribe, and follow First United Methodist Church of Baton Rouge on social media. See you next time, everyone.